All right, welcome to another episode here at Speak Up Africa. We continue to say to be informed is to be empowered. And when you're empowered, you have better leverage to be engaged. Now, today we want to carry a conversation that fundamentally is a backbone to our democracy here in Kenya, how the law operates around governance, around elections, because we've seen a pattern where after elections, people do go to court and say, we think we were unfairly represented. And to have me unpack this conversation is a man that needs no introduction. His name is honorary in the law space. Mr. Kanjama, welcome to Speak Up Africa.
I'm happy to be here.
Maybe just for someone engaging with your face today, you can do an introduction of who you are, and then we pick it from there.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. My name is Charles Kanjama. I'm a senior counsel and an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I currently also serve as the president of the Law Society of Kenya, which is the bar association for all lawyers in Kenya. I also manage a law firm called Muma and Kanjama Advocate, where I'm a founding partner. And I do other things besides, but those are the important ones for now.
Asante, we are privileged to have you here today. I guess a good place for us to start our conversation, Senior Counsel, would be, we are already seeing in our country that we are heading towards political rallies, campaigns as we get towards 2027. But there's been a debate about, are we having voter ignorance due to lack of enough civic engagement, or do we just have leadership impunity in our country?
There's always some level of ignorance by voters. That is why every electoral cycle includes civic education and voter education as a key component of the electoral process. So IBC must come up with their plan. They must generate materials for voters. We talk of both voter education and civic education. What is the difference? Although there's an overlap, voter education has to do with educating Kenyans about their political rights, their right to vote, to participate in the elections, to register as voters, where they are registered, how they will vote, how the elections will be processed and the results will be generated, and what will happen after the election results are announced by IBC. That is voter education. It's about the process. And then civic education is about everything that a citizen needs to know so that they can make the right choice during the election season and even previously, so that they can demand of their leaders, so that there can be improvement in governance. So civic education is a broader term, but this education, civic and voter education, has to take place. And there's another important reason why we need a voter and civic education, because Kenyans are the ones who will go to cast their votes. They need to be educated so that they can make informed choices.
Correct.
And informed choices will then likely be the right choice when you take it in aggregate or cumulative sense, when you consider the votes of all Kenyans. They need to be told that they should not be influenced by money, they should not be influenced by other undue influence or pressure, that they are entitled to make free choice, that their vote is a secret vote, it's a secret ballot, that they're entitled to have observers to observe what is happening, that political parties are entitled to have agents, and even individual candidates to have agents to monitor the process, and that IBC have certain responsibilities, and if you are concerned during the process, you can approach IBC. So that education is very important to have a free and fair election. And also, there is the issue of ensuring that we get the candidates to give the voter information about why they are standing. What is your manifesto? What is your track record? And if this is not done, then the voter will vote blindly. So they also need to know who are all the candidates, what are the party manifesto. So definitely the politicians who have been in office may try to project certain things as a part of their performance. Maybe it was an issue that was done by Kenya National Highways Authority, but I say, it is because of me that this road has been built.
done, yeah.
So of course, having civic education helps the people who are going to vote know exactly how to assess the candidates who are putting themselves up for election.
Okay. I like what you alluded to when you were starting that response, that there is a part of voter ignorance that we cannot ignore. As we head towards 2027, Senior Counsel, in our country, we are seeing an uprise of Gen Zs. They are coming out to be very bold, very vocal, more informed. Are we likely to see a change in the patterns as to how leaders will be elected, putting into consideration that this is a generation that is more tech savvy and more knowledgeable?
I think there are signs of hope, but also signs or reasons for caution. Signs of hope and reasons for caution. The signs for hope is the Tukokadi or Nikokadi initiative, where the young people have been mobilizing and encouraging each other to register to vote, those who have not registered to vote. And there's increasing consciousness that ultimately in a political process, your most powerful weapon is the ballot box, and how you exercise your choices. We also have signs of hope because when the Gen Z protests began 2 years ago around the finance bill, they told us that they were tribeless. They told us that they were partyless, that they were actually seeking not identity-based politics, but a politics based on agenda, manifesto, and vision. So those are the signs of hope. But there are also reasons for caution. And the reasons of caution is that there have been previous generations of young voters who seemed to be very excited about the political process, mobilized, came out for political rallies, and gave the impression that they were going to transform the country.
That's true.
And then what would happen subsequently is that these young voters, on the day of the ballot, they came out to vote in lower proportions than expected.
Yeah.
As we're approaching the elections, they allowed some people to become their leaders who are pushing partisan political agenda that was identity-based. They allowed themselves to be divided. They allowed some of them to become aloof from the process. So these things have happened to previous generations. And the proof of the pudding is in the eating. So it is only once we approach the period of elections, we're able to see how many of them have registered, how active are they in the political process, that we'll know whether the signs of hope will materialize and the reasons for caution will have been avoided.
Okay. Or that would also just tell us that they might, the Gen Z uprising might just fall to the pattern that we've seen in previous regimes. Allow me to ask, with our elections, we've seen a cycle where people go cast their votes, but when the results are announced, there are leaders who come out and say they were unfairly judged. They don't trust the credibility of IEBC, for example. There are people on the ground hawakufanya kazi. So even as we come out and say, I like what you reflected on, that there's the process and then there's kuchunga kura and then there's the announcement. Where truly do people win elections? Is it at the polling station where the announcement is made, or is it in courts when people go to say, we want to seek the law to get justice? Or now is it even with the political narratives that we see?
Each step of the process is very important. If you're already in a leadership position and you're running for fresh term, or you're running for your first term but you've been in a certain leadership position, of course you start winning elections because you have performed for the people. People can tell, huyu ni mtendakazi, or this is someone who is a worker, who will deliver. It's not just promises. So you start winning elections based on service delivery to the people. You also win elections based on campaign. If you campaign effectively, you go to the grassroots, you go to the ground. If you are part of a political party, you also campaign within the party so that you are known by the party machinery and leadership. That's a very important part of campaign. You win elections also during party primaries if you decide to go in one of the major parties. Actually, the choice of how you will campaign, whether you will seek election through a political party or as an independent candidate, and if a political party, whether it's one of the bigger parties, so-called, or one of the parties which may be a bit less known, that is also part of winning elections. And actually, for many people who are interested in elections, elections may be won or lost at that stage of whether you have actually got the right political party, whether you've engaged the party so that you can be popular and the people may actually want to vote for you.
Correct.
Then, of course, after that, there is the last stage, the official campaign period. Whether you have campaign materials, whether you've well thought out manifesto, whether you have a good campaign team, that also can be the difference between victory and defeat. In the last elections, we remember in the presidential elections, there was this issue about the side of ODM or Azimio not having agents in certain parts of the country and changing their agents very late in the day. Sometimes elections may be lost or won on voting day because of the way you monitor or observe the process. IBC is meant to run free and fair elections, but the process of IBC involves thousands of people, individuals, and they cannot guarantee the total integrity of everyone. They have systems and processes that should ensure elections are free and fair. But the reason we have observers and agents is also so that you can add an additional layer or level of assurance and security. So, of course, the preparation for the voting day is important. And after the voting day, the counting. And sometimes elections are won or lost after the declaration of results. We remember what happened in 2017 when Raila Odinga went to court. And when his team went to court, the court declared the election null and void, and a new election had to be done. So each of those stages is important. And sometimes you can win at the ballot and lose in court. And we have a constitutional structure that allows people to challenge results. Let me tell you something else. When one is a politician, you go around the country asking for votes. And Kenyans, because of our culture, we don't like telling anyone, no, you're not going to win. So majority of the people will tell you, we are with you, you are doing a good job. So you'll find all the politicians being encouraged by the citizens. And sometimes you have intermediaries who even want to make money from you. They come, they tell you, in fact, I'll sell you mugs, I'll sell you kofias. If you have these caps or these hats of mine, we'll distribute to every village, we'll win all the votes.
And we'll ensure
We'll do this, we'll
you.
do that. I've talked to the voters, they are with you. So many politicians arrive on the day of ballot believing, confident that they are going to win. So sometimes some of them, when the results come in a different way, they don't believe they lost, even if they may have lost, and they go to court. The truth is that the success rate of election petitions is probably below 10%. It's quite low. Most election petitions do not succeed, but there are those that succeed. So, of course, every stage in the process is important. You can win or lose at any stage.
Okay. So that's a very good perspective that you bring, that on the ground, people will tell you that tuko pamoja, tumesimama na wewe, tuko nyuma yako, 10 juu ya 10. And I've been hearing a certain narrative that is being formed in our society now that, kula kwa huyu lakini kura kwa yule. And it could be disappointing for some of the politicians who are going to the ballot. As we come to the courts, what offenses are more prevalent that we can see a pattern from previous electoral cycles?
So we have the Election Offences Act, and it lists a series of election offences. There are many of them. One of those offences is called treating or bribery. It is using money to induce voters. That is one of the most common election offences. There are election offences involving defacing or damaging campaign materials of other candidates. Election offenses involving fraudulent or malicious falsehoods regarding other candidates. There are election offenses involving violence that are also fairly common, using goons. This culture of goonism has become a serious issue. Then there are election day offenses. Election day offenses even include taking photos of the ballot paper so that sometimes you can show someone and then you get paid, or otherwise. Even opinion polls are meant to be done only until, I think, 3 days or a few days before the election. And if you do fake opinion polls, or you do an opinion poll that is not at the right time, if you campaign after the official campaign period is over,
yeah.
if you cause disruption during voting day, if you assault one of the officials of IBC, all these are voting offenses. So election offenses are many. One of the concerns personally I've had is that in the past, the election court, while listening to evidence of an election petition, could make a finding about an election offense. But this has changed, and now the election offense has to be processed through the normal criminal system, where you have a charge sheet, you go through the entire process. So what it has meant is that more than 90% of election offenses that are committed practically don't get prosecuted. Many of them don't get investigated, and of those that are investigated, again, very few get prosecuted. And that is a problem, because if there's no accountability, if there is no way of making people account for violations of electoral law, then you have repetition of that conduct that harms the electoral environment.
Okay. Our anthem says, "May justice be our shield and defender." Is the law practiced on our land today a tool of democracy? Or do people who say we've truly lost hope in the courts stand to be right?
Okay, so for me, as the president of the Law Society of Kenya, and as a lawyer in practice professionally, of course, I'm a strong believer in the law, and I have strong confidence in the law. The law includes several aspects, though. It includes the text of the actual instruments, the Constitution and other statutes, or acts of parliament and delegated legislation. It includes the institutions that have been set up by the law so that they can perform certain functions. And then it includes the processes that are meant to take place as prescribed by the law. And of course, it includes also the individuals who are meant to play a certain part. So it's a whole matrix or ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, some things do fail. People go to the courts of law, and sometimes they fail to get justice, or justice is delayed too long. And we say justice delayed is justice denied. So there are cases of failure of justice. And these are sad things. There are institutions that fail to discharge their mandate as expected, and they let down Kenyans. There are laws that become dead letter laws because it's in the law, but it is not being implemented. So you end up with a system or a culture of impunity. Impunity is casual or careless disregard for the law, or even reckless disregard for the law. So as we push for rule of law, and we say we must resist lawlessness, so we believe in the law. We have largely good laws in Kenya, and our major problem is actually implementation of the law. And that is a responsibility actually of every citizen, because every citizen deals with the law on a daily basis. Whether we know it or not, we are dealing with the law. Every citizen encounters failures of the legal system, and every citizen has the ability to raise their voice, to complain, to take action so that those failures do not recur.
Okay. I think from about 2 years ago, when we first had the June protest against the finance bill, we've seen people coming out to the streets and using protests, maandamano, as a way of trying to vocalize their concerns and where they feel like the system has failed them. And then after the day of the protest, we see people get arrested, and we see lawyers coming out to try and defend them. Where then does the law stand in that, and what is the responsibility of the governing bodies to defend, protect, quote unquote, the people who get arrested during the protests?
Okay, so first, the law is founded on Article 37 of our Constitution. This is the one on the right to protest. And it talks about 4 distinct rights. Every Kenyan or every person has a right peaceably and unarmed. In other words, peacefully and without weapons to do 4 things. 1, to assemble, to gather in groups. The government cannot come to start dispersing you because you've just gathered in a group to discuss anything or to talk. This is also an important civil and political rights.
Should there be a notice given before people gather?
I'm coming to that.
Okay.
Second, you have the right to demonstrate, to come together to pursue a particular cause, to publicly manifest support for or opposition to something. You have a right to demonstrate. Thirdly, you have a right to picket. Picket is about having a picket line, even some measure of obstruction for people. Maybe they are in traffic and you are moving along the road. So you've caused a bit of obstruction to go to a certain place so that everyone who has to move has to pass by a certain line. That is picketing. Fourthly, to present petitions to the public. This is what the Constitution says. This is a right of every Kenyan. Now, how do you exercise the right? That is the question. There have been court decisions that have, of course, said, yes, you need to give notice because of law and order. The police need to know what is happening because you see, you're obstructing other people. When you are demonstrating or picketing, there might be danger of loss of peace and order. So you give a notice. But the courts have said it is not a request for permission. And the old approach was that you needed to get consent or permission to protest. And the courts have also distinguished between 2 kinds of manifestation. They have said that they are the spontaneous ones. The spontaneous ones, you don't even give a notice. You don't have time to rush to the police station. People are just annoyed about something. The cars are hooting.
Yeah.
They start a protest. So for the spontaneous one, there's a way you do it. And the question of notice is different because it was not pre-planned. But when you pre-plan, like you say now, Saba, we want to organize some demonstrations, then you need to give notice to the police and sometimes even to the county government. If you want to carry banners or those kind of things, sometimes there are bylaws that say that you get certain approvals from the county because there's a form of marketing and the county government is allowed to manage the local areas in that particular place. But then the police are meant to provide security, so you notify them. So for example, in the recent second anniversary of the Gen Z protests of June 25, there were a few people who gave a general notice that there'll be protests all over the country so that you don't have to have every particular group that is deciding to demonstrate giving a notice. But generally, anytime you want to take to the streets and you're able to plan, you should be able to communicate with the police officers. Also to allow them to provide security and avoid goons infiltrating. The problem is many times they may permit the goons to infiltrate, and in some cases they have been accused of themselves inciting or sponsoring goons. And this is something that, of course, needs to be investigated. But basically what you're saying is we want to have really robust space for exercise of civil and political rights for Kenyans to be able to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions.
Okay, let's dive deeper into that. We've seen the police who ideally should be protecting protesters as they come, given the notices and all that, but a majority of them are the ones inflicting pain, inflicting unjustifiable kind of extreme measures on protesters, and days go and no action is taken against them. Is there any light in the horizon where we can right these wrongs?
So the other day, the former Chief Justice David Maraga, for example, was involved in a protest. They assembled, they were demonstrating, and then they were moving along the highway, Langata Road in Nairobi, heading to present a petition to Kenya Wildlife Services because there was allegations of grabbing. And actually, there was a process whereby some of the land of the national park was going to be set aside for other purposes. So they were legitimately protesting against this issue. And they presented a notice to some police officers who provided them with security from Langata police station. They were walking along the highway. And while they were walking along the highway, another lorry with the police officers came. These ones were in plain clothes. They were masked. The court has said they should not be masked when you're engaged in this frontline policing that involves law and order. They were masked. They started unleashing tear gas canisters. So you have one group of police officers escorting the marchers, and another group comes and overwhelms and takes over and even mishandles the first group of police officers. So until it seems like there's no central command, this is part of the problem that we've had. And also in our general protests, sometimes the police officers may take excessive measures, use force when it is not required. There have been people who've been shot and killed by police bullets in the course of protests. It's rare to have any serious protest without injuries and sometimes fatalities. This is a problem. So how do we get accountability for this? Of course, to get accountability, you have to generate evidence about what has happened. And then who is responsible. So civil society and human rights defenders have been pushing for the idea of command responsibility. If I'm not able to identify the specific individual who did this, there's somebody who has command that I should be able to finger and target when I'm seeking accountability. So this is where there has been weakness and more needs to be done. What can be done? One is members of the public need to be very conscious of the need to collect evidence about these violations of the rights of the citizens. The media themselves, as they are filming, they are also a useful source of evidence. So this is the first thing. Civil society organizations, human rights defenders need to work with the public to collect the evidence. Once the evidence is collected, then it needs to be presented to agencies that can process it and do something about it. Like the Law Society of Kenya, we have committed that if we're able to get evidence that reaches a reasonable threshold for us to pursue individual and even vicarious responsibility. Vicarious is where you go after the person who is responsible, even though they may not have been the frontline person on the street. We will do it. So the second stage is now to come to organizations like Law Society of Kenya, sometimes to go to even government agencies like IPOA, Independent Policing Oversight Authority, or Kenya National Commission on Human Rights, the Constitutional Commission, and present the evidence. And then the third phase, of course, is to pursue accountability through the court process or even processes of removal of those public officers or any other person who has violated rights of Kenyans. So it requires a good strategy to ensure we collect evidence. And of course, sometimes there's deliberate concealment, like masking is a way of anticipating and hiding the evidence that may be there. Sometimes confiscation of cameras or materials of either the media or even a member of the public who's using their phone to record. So those are other ways of concealing evidence, or even CCTV cameras. So members of the public who have evidence, we encourage them to find a way in which that evidence can reach a safe and secure agency that will ensure that it's not manipulated or damaged. Of course, members of the public also need to know that they should not distort or conceal evidence, because it is a responsibility for reasonable evidence to be provided to authorities.
Okay. And I mean, we've seen good structures penned on paper, the laws that we have. But when we get to the real following through of it, we never see justice being brought to the people who are affected, and people can come out and say, I mean, the laws don't work and follow through, for example, even with the police force that we have, because we've seen right from baby Pendo to the young people who were abducted to the ones who were unalived, during the 25 protest this year, same case. What is the Law Society doing to ensure that we get more justice served to the citizens of this country?
Okay, so the first thing is sensitization, because every citizen has a role. Every individual and, of course, public officers, they have a role in doing this. If we give the role to just a small group of people or one institution, then we are doomed to fail, because it means the rest of us don't play our role. Correct. So the first thing is to sensitize, and that is the first thing that LSK is doing. Sensitize the public and other institutions about their responsibilities and their role. And the second is to build capacity. We have to build capacity of civil society organizations, human rights defenders, collaborate with them also, because several of them already have capacity and they are doing certain useful things. And the Law Society of Kenya is the professional body for more than 20,000, almost 27,000 lawyers who have professional ability. They have been trained and they are able to represent people whose rights have been violated. So we are also sensitizing our members so that they can take up these responsibilities, opportunities. Some of them are public interest litigation. Some of them are pro bono work, because the victims maybe may not afford even the legal services.
True.
So this is the second thing we are doing. And then thirdly, we also have our own project, which is our public interest litigation project, whereby with the support of whichever partners are able to support us, we can generate some financing and mobilize our members so that they can pursue accountability and then also defend the members of the public who sometimes are unjustly arrested, caught up in swoops just because they've been out on the streets protesting. Sometimes even if they may be suspects of various offenses, they are still entitled to legal representation. So we provide that legal representation in the police stations and in the courtrooms.
All right. Let's pivot a bit towards our elections. Globally, Kenya runs one of the most expensive elections that we've seen. And again, penned on paper, we've seen laws that have been put to cap the electoral financing that goes towards, because this can be a point of disadvantage to even newbies who are coming into the political scene. Will this be implemented as we get towards 2027?
So there are two different issues. One is the cost of managing and running the election. For the election management body and all other agencies that are part of the electoral ecosystem, including the police, including all the other agencies that participate in the electoral process. And it is true, Kenya's election is largely expensive per capita when you look at the cost of the election based on the number of people voting. And partly is because there is a large trust deficit in our institutions and the people who run our elections because of our past history. That has meant that we have to invest so much to ensure that Kenyans trust the election. So, for example, the quality of our ballot paper is almost like printing currency, with all manner of security features. The way in which we carry out the elections and the number of officials that have to be involved in the elections, all that is expensive. And it's not easy to reduce the cost because of that trust deficit. Because the moment you reduce the cost, there becomes additional risks of manipulation. But I think we also need to do some re-engineering, even though it's not very easy to reduce the cost, because the cost of printing the paper, if we do effective procurement, if we use good technology, you can still print quality ballot papers for less.
Yeah.
We can procure electric or electronic systems, whether it's biometric voter identification, whether it is the ones that transmit elections, all this, we can procure them more economically. So we can actually reduce the cost of managing the electoral process, even though we need elections at a high standard of technology. When we come to the second issue, which is now the cost of campaign, the cost of elections for the candidate, again, we have a problem. Part of it is cultural. When you go to a country like the United States of America, which is in our local news from time to time, it is the citizen who contributes to the campaign kitty of the politician.
Yeah.
In Kenya, the expectation many times is the other way around. You are a politician. You find your money and also support us. And sometimes Wanjiku doesn't believe that this politician will support me after, until the politician shows before the election that they can support. As you've said, funerals, harambes, all manner of contributions, even this treating or facilitation of people to come for a rally, etc. All this thing is quite expensive. And the question is, there is an electoral campaign financing law. It has not yet been effectively implemented. Will it be implemented in this coming electoral cycle? It's going to be difficult, because to effectively implement it, you need cooperation of Parliament, of IBC, of all the players in the electoral cycle, and even of Kenyans themselves. In the US, for example, they have a campaign financing law. And one of the things in the campaign financing law is they try to put a cap on the amount that politicians can spend. And I remember during the elections of Barack Obama, he rejected the money that was being offered by the Federal Campaign Commission. Why? Because if they offered him the money, he would have to limit his spending to a certain amount. Instead, he got a lot of donations from ordinary Americans, and the amount went much higher than the cap, which was going to be the limit if he accepted federal funding. So you notice that even in the West, there are attempts to put a fixed cap, a rigid limit to how much you can spend, has come a whopper. It's not really succeeded, because campaign spending is driven by various factors. And so based on the preparations I've seen in Kenya, in trying to operationalize that law, especially on the various aspects like campaign limits, I'm not very confident that it is going to be done in this electoral cycle. In summary, answer to your question.
So maybe we try and see it after 2027. I mean, then, because that is just a single shot that we've brought out to say these are laws that are trying to be put in place, but really the truth of it being implemented and even being acted upon on the ground is different. That speaks to the mistrust that we have in our institutions. And you alluded to that as you were addressing that question. How then can institutions of power build or rebuild the trust between them and the citizens? Because that is a fundamental place that can solve a lot of problems that we have.
Since you've talked about trust, there's a book I came across some years back by Stephen Covey Jr. Stephen Covey is the one who wrote 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So his son, one of his sons, then published a book called The Speed of Trust, and it's called Stephen Covey Jr. And he said that according to him, trust has 4 key elements. First is character. Second is agenda. The third is competence, and the fourth is track record. So to build trust, individual to individual, institution to individual, etc., you check what's the character of this institution. Has it been reliable in the past? And then secondly is the agenda. What are they really trying to achieve? Is the agenda clear? Are there hidden agendas? And then competence. Competence has to do with, are they able to do the job? You know,
Yeah.
I may find you to be really wanting to help, but you are incompetent. And so my level of trust is low. And one of the ways of measuring competence is track record. What have you done in the past, so that I can use it to measure you?
Yeah.
You visit a doctor, you see them wearing a lab coat, you assume they have been practicing medicine for some time and they know. They have trained, so you trust them. So that is true about our institutions. So for as long as the institutions fail us, our level of trust is not very high. They have to succeed time and time again. And to be honest and to give credit where it is due, our electoral system has kept improving in every electoral cycle since 2007, where Kenya came to the brink of civil war with post-election violence. And even 2007 was better than the 1990s when we restored multi-party democracy. So there's been incremental growth in our electoral systems. We've kept learning from previous mistakes. For example, there was this famous decision of Maina Kiai case in the Court of Appeal that said that the locus of election is a polling station. It's the decisions that said IBC that we are not going to be ferrying ballot materials. We'll count them at the polling station, so that there is greater ability to observe what is happening, to reduce a lot of the manipulation. They said, let us do electronic transmission as well as manual transmission, so that we avoid altering of the ballot papers. They said agents and observers can observe the process from beginning to end. They brought in training materials. They said you can go to court and the court has to decide the case within 6 months. So there have been incremental gains in our electoral process. And many of our neighboring countries actually admire how far Kenya has come. We are able to have elections where there is a small margin between the winner and the loser. Like in the last 2 elections, the margin has been 2-3% in a presidential election, and we're able to resolve it. Some countries in Africa would not be able to deal with such a close election. The amount of chaos that would take place and rigging, manipulation would be much more than what is happening here. So you notice that Kenya, like some countries in the West, is able to have close elections and still a higher level of confidence. We've not got to where we should, but we're heading there.
All right. So we trust the process that things will get better. As you come to a close of the conversation, Senior Counsel, I sit personally at a place where I say, as much as citizens demand from institutions of influence, we do have our own responsibilities that we need to take part in. So beyond voting, what are a responsible citizenship characteristics? What does that look like for even our listeners who will be watching this?
I think Article 38, this is now the next article of the Constitution. We talked about 37. It talks about political rights of Kenyans. And there are several rights. It's not just the right to vote in the general election. First of all, by the time you reach the general election, the political parties have already determined their candidates, and it becomes difficult to influence the choice of who's the best candidate on the ballot. So Kenyans should also participate when they can in processes of determining candidates during nomination or party primaries. They are entitled to join political parties, to take part in the political process. They themselves can come out as candidates and campaign and go around the country. So all those are things that Kenyans can do. But more importantly, Kenyans need to educate themselves, and so that they can assess the candidates for leadership based on objective criteria, and not just assess as an individual. Because you see, if yourself, Wendy, or myself, Charles, I decide to vote for a particular candidate, it's good, but maybe I could have spoken to my colleagues, my co-workers, based on what I have assessed and analyzed, not on issues of tribalism or just ethnic grounds or grounds, demographic grounds like gender, age, religion, but on grounds that unite us and say who is the best candidate for the job, and then share the word with others. So mobilize. You can mobilize sometimes by going to the streets, going for political rallies. Sometimes it's on social media or digital means of communication. You can mobilize. So there's really so much we can do to impact the elections. Either you are taking part as an active participant in the political process, as a candidate, as a member of a political party, as a voter during party primaries, or you are there as a Kenyan citizen who's observing and still participating in the public space, in dialogue, in engagement. Even like what you're doing with this podcast is a fantastic means of engaging the public on what needs to be done. So we need more of this.
Okay. And here at Speak Up Africa, we continue to bring you conversations that aim to inform, engage, and empower. As you give us your closing reflections from your own perspective, cutting across the different facets that we have in our democracy, what are some of the key things that you think, if would be changed and implemented, would make a difference in our democracy?
So for me, I think the two biggest problems, I call them cancers of our society, which also harm our democracy, are corruption and tribalism or negative ethnicity, because there is a positive ethnicity where we recognize and acknowledge our ethnic identity, our culture. We celebrate it without using it as a means of division or distinction from others, negative distinction. So I think those are the two biggest challenges. When our founding president, Jomo Kenyatta, spoke soon after Kenya became independent, he said that our three main enemies are poverty, ignorance, and disease. That was in the 1960s. If you ask me in the 2020s, we have been dealing with poverty. It is still a challenge, but we've been dealing with it, and the terms of or the standards of living have been improving. If you look at ignorance, our level of education and literacy has increased tremendously since the 1960s. If you look at disease, our healthcare system is improving. So what are the enemies of today for a political system? One is corruption. Corruption kills, corruption destroys, corruption cheats. Corruption is a murderer. Corruption is a sinner against each of the 10 commandments. So we need to fight corruption, and it shows its ugly face during elections. And the way to fight corruption is through accountability. The second is negative ethnicity or tribalism. Some people try to mobilize based on ethnicity because they think that is easier than having to account for their character, their agenda, and their track record, and their competence. You see, those things of trust. They find it easy to whip up tribal emotion. And we need to deal with it. The National Cohesion Integration Commission is meant to ensure we avoid hate speech, and to the extent that elections is taking place, we all are disciplined in the electoral process. Sometimes you find very intense and hateful remarks even on social media, sometimes even by young people. So I think those are our two key things that if we deal with, the rest will sort itself out.
Okay. Senior Counsel Charles Kanjama, thank you for making time to come to Speak Up Africa. I truly believe that if more people vocalize and build together an ecosystem where we have more engagement in civic responsibilities and duties, we do participate in the role of making our country a better place. Thank you for coming.
And thank you for inviting me. It has been a pleasure, and I look forward to other interactions.
Asante. When we come together collectively, we truly have an impact in taking our African democracies very far. And even as a country, as we gear towards the campaign season and choosing our leaders, we do have a fundamental role to play in taking up responsibility, being part of the processes to make the difference that we demand and we want to see. Thank you for joining us on this episode today. For now, we will love you and leave you and see you on the next one. My name is Wendy Lois. Thank you.